Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So in the last lecture, we saw holomorphic functions in some detail. If f is equal to u plus iv is holomorphic in omega, then both u and v satisfy the Cauchy-Riemann equations, and fxy equal to u of xy comma v of xy is real differentiable. We also saw that neither 1 nor 2 is sufficient to guarantee holomorphicity, but 1 and 2 together guarantee holomorphicity. And we also studied holomorphic harmonic functions, which are closely related to holomorphic functions. The notion of holomorphic conjugate of a given holomorphic function was defined, and it was stated that the existence of a harmonic conjugate for every harmonic function is guaranteed if and only if the domain is nice. And the precise mathematical condition replacing the word nice is simply connected. So this is something which is stronger than path connected, in fact, much stronger than path connected. And we will come to this notion later. It's a somewhat sophisticated notion, and complex analysis depends very crucially on this notion from algebraic topology, the notion of simply connectedness. Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so maybe a word or two about the names of the people who are responsible for developing this subject. So these are the two gentlemen, the clean-shaven Cauchy and the bearded Riemann. So both were very, very prolific mathematicians, mathematicians really of the top quality. And here is a little quote about Cauchy. More concepts and theorems have been named after Cauchy than any other mathematician. In elasticity alone, there are 16 concepts and theorems named after Cauchy. Cauchy was a prolific writer. He wrote approximately 800 research articles and 5 complete textbooks. So, enormously creative mathematician, Cauchy. Riemann was of the different kind. Riemann is one of the greatest mathematicians of all times. And after Newton, he is possibly the mathematician who has had the greatest impact on the development of mathematics ever since. In a short research career he wrote under 20 papers, most of them worth their weight in gold. And his areas of contribution include real analysis, complex analysis, function theory, Riemannian geometry, and number theory. Most importantly, the distribution of primes, and also various areas of mathematical physics. I mean, he was a person who was interested in physics and philosophy and many other things. So conjecture he made in 1859, which is now known as the Riemann hypothesis, is considered to be the most important open problem today. And proving this would fetch $1 million from the Clay Mathematics Association. So some 20 years back, the Clay Mathematics Association for Clay Mathematics Foundation announced 7 problems. The proof of any one of them would earn you $1 million from the foundation. Many of you would be aware of the famous P versus NP problem in computer science, right? So this is another one of those $1 million problems. And Riemann hypothesis is the oldest of them and also perhaps the most important. Okay. So let's begin with polynomial. So today we want to discuss the so-called analytic functions. So let's first look at the simplest of all analytic functions. So fz equal to a naught, it means these are constant functions. These are the simplest analytic functions. And the next easiest class of functions are the polynomials. Right? Fz equal to a naught plus a1z dot am z to the n. They are clearly holomorphic everywhere in C. The same polynomial fz can be expanded along any other point z naught. That is, fz can be written as b naught plus b1 z minus b1 times z minus z naught plus dot 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 plus bn z minus z naught to the power n, and the complex numbers bi's can be calculated easily. Of course, you can expand out z minus z naught using binomial theorem and then compare coefficients and get bi's in terms of ai's, right? Perhaps a smarter way to do it is to note that bi is the ith derivative of f at z naught upon I factorial. right? So look at this expansion summation bi z minus z naught to the power I. When you take the ith derivative at z naught, all the other terms except the ith term vanish. Yeah, the lower powers of z minus z naught get killed. The higher powers also get annihilated when you substitute z equal to z naught, and you're only left with the ith term. And then bi becomes the ith derivative at z naught upon I factorial, and which can now be computed using fz. So fz gives you the derivatives. Using those derivatives, substituting gives you the bi's. So this is how you can expand a polynomial around any other point. Is this okay?
Yes, sir.
And polynomial by definition is a finite is by definition a finite polynomial. That means it comes with a finite degree. And as the next class of examples, we consider functions defined by their power series. They look like fz equal to a0 plus a1z plus a2z square and so on. Or more generally, if you expand around some other point, summation ai z minus z0 to the I, where I now runs from 0 to infinity. Of course, one has to be careful. There are convergence issues. For example, if you take the function fz equal to 1 plus z square, etc., this makes sense for all z so that mod z is less than 1, but not when mod z is bigger than 1. So why does it not make sense when mod z is bigger than 1?
It is not bounded.
Yeah, but that would be saying that would be sort of paraphrasing this. But why is it not bounded?
It won't converge.
Yeah, but the question is why will it not converge?
So the subsequent terms would become larger and larger. So
Yeah,
that is why
right.
it would diverge.
So for something to converge, the terms
has to
have
be Cauchy.
to 0. Yeah, the terms have to eventually tend to 0 for something to converge, for a sum to converge, for a series to converge. And when mod z is more than 1, the terms are just becoming larger and larger in magnitude. So there is no way this will converge. And we say that this power series has radius of convergence 1. Means it converges for any z with mod z less than 1, does not converge for any z so that mod z is bigger than 1. So we will come to this notion again soon. It's a beautiful fact that the radius of convergence exists for any power series. What does it mean? That means there exists a real number r such that summation ai z minus z naught to the power I converges when mod of z minus z naught is less than r, and diverges when mod of z minus z naught is bigger than r. Such a r always exists. In other words, the radius of convergence is the largest r, so that the given power series converges inside the disk of radius r. And we will soon give a formula for r in terms of the coefficients of the power series. So we will soon prove all this. The existence of r and recall a few notions related to series. So before we prove the existence of radius of convergence, let's recall a few definitions and observations. We write a equal to summation ai. I goes from 1 to infinity. Ai's are complex numbers. If the sequence of partial sums Sn, where Sn is in a1 plus a2 up to an, converges. So given any series summation ai, it gives rise to a sequence, namely a1 plus a2, a1 plus a2 plus a3, and so on. And if this sequence converges to some a, we will say that this series converges to a. And this is a series of complex numbers. So the series is said to be absolutely convergent if summation mod ai is convergent. So I've not introduced this word, but when summation ai is convergent, we usually call it okay, let's say we just call it convergent. If summation mod ai is convergent, we call it absolutely convergent. Fine. And now let me drop a little exercise. Absolute convergence always implies convergence. That is one. And easy comparison test. If summation bi is absolutely convergent, and if mod ai is less than or equal to mod bi for all sufficiently large I, then summation ai is absolutely convergent. So second is completely obvious. The first is also not difficult to prove.
Sir, what is meant by partial sums?
So partial sums is what I have written. So if I have a series summation ai, that's my series of complex numbers. Then the sequence of partial sums Sn means S1 is equal to A1, S2 is equal to A1 plus A2, S3 is equal to A1 plus A2 plus E3, and so on. That's what I mean by sequence of partial sums. It's quite a suggestive terminology, right? You're just taking a partial sum of the series. Okay. Now coming to the next slide. The series 1 minus, so this exercise said absolute convergence implies convergence, so naturally you want to know what about the converse. So here is an example. If you take this series 1 minus half plus 1 by 3 etc., this converges to log 2, natural log 2, but it does not converge absolutely. After all, the harmonic series summation 1 by n diverges. Yeah, have people seen this fact, the summation 1 by n diverges, MA 105 or something?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So that is known to you. But if I take the alternate sum, summation minus 1 raised to n upon n, then it does converge. It converges to log 2. So we will soon expand various analytic functions in terms of their power series. In particular, we will be expanding the log function, and we will see that this is this is the series for the logarithm. Okay, so many examples of convergent series which are not absolutely convergent. So now recall another notion, the notion of a supremum. So let Xn be a sequence of real numbers. We say that a real number m is the supremum of this sequence if every term of this sequence is less than or equal to m. And there exist terms of this sequence which are arbitrarily close to m. There are two conditions: m should be larger than or equal to all the terms, and the term should be arbitrary. There should be terms which are arbitrarily close to m. If that happens, we say m is the supremum. Equivalently, it is the smallest real number having the property that it is greater than or equal to all the terms of the sequence. It is the least of all the numbers which are greater than all the terms of the sequence. So the supremum may or may not exist, and if it does exist, it may or may not equal any of the terms of the sequence. That is, the supremum may not be attained in the sequence. For example, the supremum of the sequence 1, 1.4, 1.41, 1.414, 1.4142, etc. The supremum is equal to square root of 2, but square root of 2 is not attained in the sequence. It is strictly bigger than all the terms on the sequence. Yeah. So this is not something new, but very relevant to whatever we want to discuss. Yeah, so no doubts about this, I suppose. Okay. Now there is a slightly more subtle notion which is very important for us, which is what's called the upper limit or limit supremum. So again, I am not very familiar with MA 105. Was lim-sup discussed in MA 105? Lim-sup?
No, sir.
Or maybe they called, okay. So let's discuss this in slowly and in detail. So for a sequence of real numbers, x1, x2, etc., let yn be the supremum of the set xn plus 1, xn plus 1, etc. So in particular, y1 is the supremum of all the terms in the sequence. Y2 is the supremum of all the terms in the sequence starting from the second. Y3 is the supremum starting from the third, and so on. Right? Then the sequence y1, y2, etc. is a monotonically decreasing sequence, because you are taking supremum over smaller sets. Once you take supremum over smaller set, the number becomes smaller. So this is a monotonically decreasing sequence. It may not be strictly monotonically decreasing, but monotonically decreasing. This may diverge to infinity or may have a finite limit. If this limit exists, then this upper limit coincides with the usual limit. So examples. So the first example is, suppose xn is a convergent sequence converging to some L. Then L is the lim-sup. So why is that? because you're taking supremum of x1 onwards, then you're taking supremum from x2 onwards, etc. Eventually, for some large n, when you take supremum of xn, xn plus 1, xn plus 2, etc., all those xi's are going to be very close to L. They will be between L minus epsilon and L plus epsilon. So the supremum will also be in L minus epsilon to L plus epsilon. But epsilon was arbitrary, so it will be equal to L. Is this clear?
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, why would the sequence y1, y2 be monotonically decreasing?
Because I'm taking supremum over smaller and smaller sets. See, suppose let's take the following. Suppose I have two sets of real numbers, S1 and S2. And suppose S1 is less than S2. Okay, then the supremum of all the terms in S1 will be less than the supremum of all the terms in S2, right?
Sir, I didn't get you. Can you repeat once again?
I'm saying, suppose I have a smaller set of real numbers, and I take
Yes.
supremum of all the members of that set.
Yes, sir.
That will be less than taking supremum of all the members of the bigger set, right? Because the bigger set may have some large elements which I may have missed out in the smaller set.
The set can be bigger and still be, the elements can still be smaller than the elements of the smaller set.
No. I'm taking my sets with S1 contained in S2. My smaller set is contained in the bigger set.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah. That is what is happening here. First, I'm taking the supremum of all the elements. Then I'm taking the supremum of all the elements from second onwards. Then third onwards, and so on. So I'm taking supremum over smaller and smaller sets. So the supremums reduce.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Sir,
Yeah.
how do you know that the supremum will exist?
It does not exist in general.
So then, if y1 supremum does not exist, then what will be put in place of y1?
No. The point is you have a monotonically decreasing sequence, right? Y1, etc. Right? So monotonically decreasing sequence of real. See, y1 could be infinite. After all, the supremum of the xi's. So I'm saying y1 is the supremum of all the xi's. So y1 could be finite or infinite. If xi is unbounded, a y1 will be infinite.
Okay.
But y2 is anyway less than y1. So if y1 is finite, y2 is also finite, and y2 is less than y1. So now if you have a decreasing sequence of real numbers, all of which are bounded, it will tend to a limit, right? So there are only two possibilities. Either it is infinite or it has a finite limit. It cannot oscillate.
Okay, sir. Understood.
Sir, it is not necessary to be strictly less than y2 need not be strictly less than y1, right?
No. That is why I said it's not strictly monotonically decreasing. It's only monotonically decreasing.
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Hmm.
so for the sequence in example number 2, the natural number sequence 1, 2, 3,
No.
4.
I'm coming to the examples. Let's not jump. So I'm coming to that. I have not discussed it yet. So for example 1 first.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, it diverges to infinity means each of y1, y2, y3.
Correct. That's what it means. Diverges to infinity means each of the yi's are infinity.
Okay.
For example, the sequence 1. Okay, now so that is exactly the example to take. If you take y 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Then each of the yi's is infinity. Okay. So let's finish example 1 first. So if xn is a convergent sequence, then the lim sup is equal to wherever the sequence converges. Because all the terms eventually become very close to L. So L will also be the maximum. L will also be the supremum of the set. I mean, L will also be the limit of all the supremums. So that is the first example, first and the most important example. that when the sequence is convergent, its lim sup equals its limit. Second example.
Something seems to be blocking your screen.
Blocking my screen. Can you see me now?
Something's covering the top half of your screen, at least for me.
What about the others?
Is it?
So
slide
it
is
is
clearly
visible.
visible, sir.
Screencast, but
That happens when there's an unstable internet connectivity.
oh, I see. Okay, sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
you can go on
Anyway.
then. It must be my problem.
Okay. Anyway, perhaps it's not so important to see me. Hearing me is perhaps more important. Yeah. The audio is clear, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's look at the second example. Second example I mentioned just now, the sequence 1, 2, 3, etc. that has a lim sup equal to infinity. Because each yi is infinity. But now the third example, let's take the sequence 1, -1, 1, -1, etc. That lim sup is 1. In fact, each of the yi's is equal to 1. If you take limit, if you take the supremum of the whole series, it is 1. If you exclude the first term and take the supremum again, it is 1. If you exclude the first, even if you exclude the first 1000, the supremum is still 1. So yi is in this case is the constant sequence 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. So the lim sup is equal to 1. Yeah. And the fourth example, you take the sequence 1 half, then 2 1 by 3, then 3 1 by 4, then 4 1 by 5. In this case, the lim sup is infinity. Yeah, because we have arbitrarily large terms. So lim sup is going to be infinity. Yeah, so are all the 4 basic examples clear?
Sir, in the second and fourth examples,
Yeah.
How can we say that yi is monotonically decreasing?
No, decrease. If it's infinity, or if it's infinity throughout, I'm calling it monotonically decreasing. That is why I'm not using the word strict monotonically decreasing. It's just a matter of convention.
Okay, so if the sequence is all infinities, then we are saying that it is monotonically decreasing as well.
As long as the terms don't increase, we call it monotonically decreasing. If the terms strictly decrease, then we call it strict monotonically decreasing.
Okay, sir.
Just convention. Okay. So it's not a very complicated notion, but very useful and okay. Now let us come to an important convergence test. I won't prove this, but let me state this at least. For a series summation ai of complex numbers, let C equal to lim sup of the ith root of mod ai. Then the series converges absolutely if C is less than 1 and it diverges if C is bigger than 1. The test is indecisive for C equal to 1. The theorem clear? Right? I suppose this is fine. The Cauchy's root test. And there is another test which is called the ratio test. So for a series summation ai, let L equal to lim sup of mod ai plus 1 upon ai. Then if L is less than 1, the series converges absolutely, and the series diverges if there exists n such that mod ai plus 1 upon ai is bigger than 1 for I bigger than or equal to n. Okay, so we will prove this. We will prove the ratio test and remark. So here, if L is bigger than 1 in the above test, it does not imply that the series diverges. I leave this as an exercise, but important exercise. So this will be discussed in the tutorials. So if L is less than 1, it converges absolutely. If L is bigger than 1, also it can converge absolutely. Okay, but when does it diverge? It diverges if there exists an integer n, capital N, so that mod ai plus 1 by ai, this is bigger than 1 for I bigger than or equal to n. Yeah, is the statement clear?
Yes, the statement is clear.
Okay. Now let us see the proof, but this remark is important to keep in mind. Okay. So proof. So let L be less than 1. So in this theorem, of course, you will notice easily that the second part is really obvious. The series diverges if there exists n, so that mod ai plus 1 by ai is bigger than 1. That is kind of obvious because the terms, that means, will just keep getting bigger and bigger. So the second part of the theorem is really obvious. The first part that requires proof. If after some stage mod ai plus 1 by ai becomes more than 1, that means beyond that stage, the terms of the sequence, terms of the series are only becoming larger and larger in magnitude. There's no way that's going to converge. Okay. So let us see the proof of the root test, ratio test. So let L be less than 1 and let R be such that L is less than R is less than 1. So choose some real number between L and 1. Yes, since L is strictly less than 1, you can always do that. Then after some stage, say I bigger than or equal to n, mod ai plus 1 is less than R times mod ai. Does everybody agree with this statement? Just stare at it for a minute. This requires just a tiny bit of thought. I claim that after a certain stage, say I bigger than or equal to n, mod ai plus 1 is always less than R times mod ai. Can somebody say why this is true?
You can use the
mod ai by plus 1 by mod ai converges to L, and R is larger than L. So after a certain stage, R must be.
You have to be careful. Mod ai plus 1 upon ai does not converge to L. L is only the lim sup. It does not converge to L.
But you said that if a sequence has a lim sup, then that is its limit.
No, that's not it. I mean, the sequence can have lim sup. No, 1 minus 1, 1 minus 1, etc. The lim sup is equal to 1. I am saying in this case, if limit exists, that means the usual limit exists, then this lim sup coincides with the usual limit, which is also my first example. So if there was any confusion, let me clear it here. In this slide, I've written if the limit exists, that means the usual limit exists, then the lim sup coincides with the upper limit, coincides with the usual limit. And this is also my first example. Yeah, I'm not saying if the lim sup exists, then it is equal to its limit or something. It's only one way. Limit existing is stronger.
Sir?
Yeah.
So what is lim sup of a series? What we have defined was lim sup of a sequence. Like
so lim sup of a series is the lim sup of its partial sums.
Okay, so it's a sequence of sum of a first element.
So I've already given the sorry, let me say this clear. That's not quite correct. See, in every case I'm explaining. In every case when I take lim sup, I'm explaining what my series is. So in this case, I'm saying let L be the lim sup of mod ai plus 1 upon ai. So mod ai plus 1 upon ai gives you a sequence, right? The first term will be a2 by mod a2 by a1. The second term will be mod a3 by a2. The third term will be mod a4 by a3, etc.
Okay.
So this series is giving rise to this sequence.
Yes.
Taking the lim sup of that. So every case I will specify what sequence I'm taking, what sequence I'm considering in defining my lim sup. Yeah. Okay. Now coming back to the proof, we have chosen some R between L and 1, and I say that after some stage I bigger than or equal to n, mod ai plus 1 is less than R times mod ai. That's because eventually all the terms, the maximum of all the terms is going to converge to L. That means it's going to be very close to L, right? The maximum of all the terms. So L minus epsilon to L plus epsilon. And I can simply choose epsilon to be so small that L plus epsilon is also less than R. So I just choose the stage sufficiently far so that the supremum of all those terms is very close to L. If it's very close to L, it will be less than R. L is strictly less than R. So if something is very close to L, it is also going to be less than R. Yeah, it is because of this that this statement holds. Then after a certain stage, say for I bigger than or equal to n, mod ai plus 1 is less than R times mod ai. Yeah. Ponder over it a little bit. Yeah, think about it. I don't want to go excessively slow, but this is just a consequence of the lim sup being equal to L. And so mod of AI plus K is less than R to the K times mod of AI. Yeah, repeatedly applying this. And so now let's take this sum, summation mod AI. This is summation mod AI from 0 to n, and then plus summation from n plus 1 to infinity. So this is equal to summation mod AI from 0 to n plus summation mod n plus I from 1 to infinity. I'm simply renumbering the second term. Instead of summation mod AI from n plus 1 to infinity, I will call it summation a n plus I from 1 to infinity. This is by definition less than summation mod AI from 0 to n plus mod an into summation r to the power I from 1 to infinity, because each of those terms is less than r times mod of AI. So mod of an plus I is less than mod an into r to the power I. So you have this. So you have this inequality, and following the inequality, you have equality, which is summation mod AI plus mod an into this geometric series. We know where it converges. It converges to r upon 1 minus r. And this is less than infinity because the first term is something bounded, and now you have it's just a sum of two bounded terms. So this is less than infinity. Therefore, the series converges. Converges absolutely. Yeah, is the proof clear? Huh?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So just go over it slowly again later, but it's really simple actually. Just a matter of understanding what lim sup means, and perhaps I did not explain one thing right at the start, which I should have said right. Why are we discussing all this? Our interest is in discussing complex analysis, right? Why are we even discussing this series and so on? The reason is we are soon going to prove, maybe a couple of lectures from now, that all our holomorphic functions can be expanded locally in terms of can be expanded into convergent series in a neighborhood of every point. Every holomorphic function can be expanded around any point into a convergent power series.